Think about the grand, iconic images of ancient Egypt for a moment. You probably see golden sands, monumental pyramids reaching for the heavens, and lavish feasts with exotic foods spread before pharaohs adorned in jewels. It's a powerful vision, one that Hollywood has perfected, but what if I told you that this picture, as captivating as it is, completely obscures a far more fascinating and human story? The real engine of this civilization, the literal muscle and sweat that raised those timeless structures from the desert floor, wasn't powered by the delicacies of the elite. Today, we are setting aside the silver platters of the nobility to venture into the bustling, sun-baked workers' villages. We are going to uncover the gritty, surprising, and often downright delicious reality of what ancient Egyptian workers really ate every single day. This isn't a story about gods and kings. This is the story of the common men and women, the backbone of an empire, and their daily sustenance. And what you're about to discover will completely shatter your expectations. Their diet was not one of meager scraps or simple gruel. It was a sophisticated, substantial, and carefully engineered system of nutrition that would put many modern diets to shame. It was a cuisine born of ingenuity and necessity, designed to fuel the most ambitious construction projects the world had ever seen. We are going to walk through their villages, peer into their storage jars, and sit with them as they broke their bread. We will explore the complex economy that brought fish from the Nile and beer from vast state-run breweries directly to their tables. You will learn how a civilization that built for eternity also mastered the science of feeding its people, ensuring that the hands that carved history were strong, healthy, and surprisingly well-fed. So prepare to have everything you thought you knew turned on its head. This journey into the daily life of the pyramid builders is a testament to their resilience and to the brilliant, practical heart of ancient Egypt itself, a story written not in hieroglyphs of gold, but in the grain, the fish, and the bread that built a world. To truly grasp the significance of their diet, we must first meet the people themselves. These were not slaves toiling under a merciless whip, a cinematic image that is dramatically at odds with the historical evidence. Instead, the workforce consisted of highly skilled, state-employed artisans and laborers. A perfect window into their world is the village of Deir el-Medina, a purpose-built community on the west bank of the Nile near Thebes, home to the very men who carved and decorated the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. This was a bustling, organized settlement of specialists. Imagine a community populated by stonemasons who could shape solid rock with astonishing precision, carpenters crafting intricate furniture for the afterlife, draftsmen sketching elaborate religious scenes onto tomb walls, and painters who mixed vibrant pigments to bring those scenes to life for eternity. These were the elite construction workers of their day, and their labor was invaluable. Their work was both physically brutal and mentally demanding. A typical day involved a long, hot climb up the desert cliffs to the tomb entrance, followed by hours of back-breaking labor in cramped, poorly ventilated, and dimly lit subterranean chambers. The stonemasons would be covered in a fine, abrasive dust, swinging heavy stone tools to cut through the bedrock. The painters worked for hours on scaffolding, their eyes strained in the flickering light of oil lamps. This was not casual employment. It was a relentless, state-sponsored project on a deadline that stretched for decades. The sheer physical exertion required to perform these tasks day in and day out created a massive caloric deficit. Their bodies were like furnaces, burning through energy at an incredible rate just to maintain basic function and repair muscle tissue. They needed fuel, dense, efficient, and abundant fuel. This context is everything. The food they received wasn't just a matter of subsistence, it was a calculated part of their payment, a form of energy currency designed to power the most ambitious architectural projects of the ancient world. The state understood that a well-fed worker was a strong, productive, and, crucially, a content worker. So, when we look at the bread, the beer, and the other foods that made up their daily rations, we are not just looking at a menu. We are looking at the fundamental fuel that enabled the creation of the very tombs of the pharaohs, a direct transaction between the state and the muscle and skill that built its legacy. So what exactly was this fundamental fuel, this energy currency that powered a civilization? It came down to two humble yet monumental staples that were inseparable in the ancient Egyptian mind: bread and beer. Think of them not as two separate items, but as two sides of the same coin, the yin and yang of daily sustenance. Both were born from the same essential ingredients, grains like emmer wheat and barley, and both were processed in a closely linked cycle of production. Emmer wheat was a particularly hardy grain, a predecessor to modern wheat with a tougher husk that required more effort to thresh and grind, but it was well suited to the Egyptian climate. Barley was its steadfast companion, often used in conjunction to create a more complete nutritional profile. The process of making bread began with grinding this grain on heavy, coarse sandstone querns. This was backbreaking, repetitive labor, typically performed by women, and it introduced an unavoidable and somewhat shocking ingredient into the final product: stone fragments and sand. The constant friction of the grinding stones wore them down, mixing tiny, abrasive particles directly into the flour. This gritty texture is not just a historical footnote. Archaeologists have examined the well-preserved remains of these workers and found their teeth to be severely worn down, even in relatively young individuals, a direct testament to a lifetime of consuming this daily bread. Yet, for all its abrasiveness, this bread was a powerhouse. It was dense, packed with complex carbohydrates for sustained energy release, fiber for digestive health, and a surprising array of B vitamins and minerals from the whole grain and even from the stone grit itself. It was typically baked into sturdy, flat loaves or cooked directly on the embers of a fire, forming a solid, chewy base for every meal. Now, let's turn to the beer, or heket as the ancient Egyptians called it. It is crucial to completely reset our modern understanding of the word. This was not the clear, bubbly, primarily alcoholic beverage we know today. Egyptian beer was a thick, cloudy, porridge-like concoction, more akin to a liquid meal or a nutrient-dense smoothie. Its alcohol content was very low, perhaps only 1 or 2%, making it a safe daily drink for everyone, including children. The brewing process was a beautiful piece of culinary alchemy that was intimately connected to bread making. It started with partially baking barley bread, which created a malted base rich in enzymes. This partially baked beer bread was then crumbled into a large vat of water and left to ferment, often with the addition of some dates for natural sweetness to balance the sour, yeasty tang. The result was a thick, nutrient-rich slurry that had to be strained through a sieve before drinking to remove the larger husks and chunks. This daily beer was not an indulgence, it was a fundamental pillar of nutrition and hydration. In a climate where the safety of drinking water could be questionable, the fermentation process made beer far safer, killing off many harmful pathogens. It was packed with calories, B vitamins crucial for converting food into energy, and live yeast cultures that aided digestion. For a laborer heading out to the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings, a jug of this beer was not about getting a buzz, it was about carrying a portable, hydrating, and calorie-dense meal that would sustain them through hours of grueling physical work. Together, this duo of gritty bread and substantial beer formed the unshakable foundation of life. They provided the caloric ballast, the essential nutrients, and the safe hydration that allowed an entire workforce to not just survive, but to thrive and accomplish the seemingly impossible. The process of creating that foundational loaf of bread was a symphony of arduous, coordinated effort. a daily ritual that transformed raw grain into edible energy. It all began with the grain itself, primarily emmer wheat, which was first separated from its tough, protective husks through a method called pounding. Workers would use heavy wooden pestles in large stone mortars to thresh the grain, a rhythmic, percussive activity that filled the air with a cloud of chaff and dust. Once the grains were freed, the real test of endurance began, the grinding. This was done on a simple yet brutal tool known as a saddle quern. Picture a large, slightly concave slab of coarse sandstone, perhaps 2 feet long. The worker, almost always a woman, would kneel before it, taking a smaller, handheld grinding stone, a sort of oblong rock, and push it back and forth across the slab with relentless, repetitive motion. The emmer grains were fed into this primitive mill, slowly and laboriously crushed into a coarse, wholemeal flour. This was not a quick task. It could take hours to produce enough flour for a single family's daily bread, and with every push and pull, tiny, almost invisible fragments of the grinding stone itself would flake off, becoming an inseparable, gritty ingredient in the flour. This sandy texture was an unavoidable part of life, a physical reminder of the immense effort baked into every single bite. Once enough of this gritty flour was produced, it was mixed with water and a bit of old, fermented dough saved from the previous batch to act as a natural leavening agent in large ceramic troughs or even directly on clean patches of ground. The resulting dough was thick and heavy, and the baker would then shape it into its distinctive forms. While flat discs were common, archaeological evidence from tomb paintings and actual preserved loaves found at sites like Deir el-Medina show a fascinating variety. Some were shaped into small, conical forms, perfect for individual portions. Others were molded into distinctive, long, tapered loaves that resembled giant teardrops. There were even intricate plated loaves, suggesting that even this basic staple could hold an element of artistry, but the final, transformative step was the baking. Most homes did not have private ovens. Instead, baking was a communal activity. Villages were dotted with large, beehive-shaped ovens made of baked clay. A fire would be lit inside the oven, heating the clay walls to a high temperature. Once the fire had died down to embers, the shaped loaves were either placed directly on the hot interior surface or slapped onto the heated outer wall, where they would bake quickly into a firm, crusty shell. The result was a dense, chewy, and incredibly filling bread, but one that was, by its very nature, laced with microscopic particles of quartz and feldspar from the grinding stones. We have devastatingly direct proof of this gritty reality etched into the very bones of the people themselves. Physical anthropologists studying the skeletons from workers' cemeteries, such as those at Giza and Deir el-Medina, have made a startling and consistent observation: their teeth are catastrophically worn down. Even in individuals as young as their late 20s, the crowns of the molars are often ground flat, worn away to the point where the pulp cavity, the sensitive inner core of the tooth containing nerves and blood vessels, is exposed. This extreme dental attrition led to a lifetime of pain, chronic abscesses, and severe infections that could, and did, prove fatal. This wasn't caused by age or disease. It was the direct, cumulative result of a lifetime of consuming their daily bread. Each mouthful of that nourishing, energy-rich staple was also a mouthful of fine sand, acting like sandpaper on their tooth enamel with every single chew. This stark archaeological evidence transforms our understanding of their daily sustenance from an abstract concept into a visceral, physical experience. It underscores a profound truth about their existence: their strength and vitality, the very fuel that built the pyramids, came at a significant and painful personal cost, a price paid with every meal that gave them the strength to achieve immortality for their pharaohs. While their bread was a solid source of sustenance, the beer that accompanied it was its liquid counterpart, a masterpiece of ancient food science that served as both a drink and a meal. The brewing process was a brilliant and efficient cycle, often happening right alongside the bread baking in a seamless domestic operation. It began not with raw grain, but with loaves of bread specifically made for the purpose. Brewers would take barley dough and only partially bake it in a hot oven, just enough to set the shape, but not enough to kill the natural enzymes within the grain. This crucial step initiated the malting process, where the starches in the barley began to break down into simpler, fermentable sugars. These resulting malted, beer loaves were then crumbled into a large fermentation vat, which was typically a wide-mouthed ceramic jar that could hold a substantial volume. Water was then added to cover the crumbled bread, and the mixture was left to sit. Wild yeast spores, ever present in the air and likely clinging to the brewing vessels themselves, would naturally colonize the sugary slurry, kicking off the fermentation process. To encourage this and add a touch of sweetness to balance the inherently sour, yeasty flavor, brewers often tossed in a handful of mashed dates. After several days of sitting in the warm Egyptian climate, the mixture would become a bubbling, mildly alcoholic brew. But this was nothing like the clear, golden liquid we pour from a bottle today. The final product was thick, cloudy, and porridge-like, packed with suspended yeast, protein, and fiber from the grain. Before drinking, it was customary to strain it through a sieve made of reeds or pottery to remove the largest husks and solid bits, resulting in a nutritious, smoothie-like beverage that was consumed through straws from a communal pot to avoid the sediment that settled at the bottom. This daily beer, or heket, was incredibly low in alcohol, likely hovering around 1 or 2%, just enough for a slight preservative effect and a pleasant taste, but nowhere near enough to cause intoxication during a workday. Its true value was multifaceted. In a land where the Nile, though life-giving, could be contaminated with bacteria and parasites from human and animal waste, the fermentation process made beer a significantly safer hydration source. The alcohol and acidic byproducts created an environment that was hostile to many of the waterborne pathogens that caused dysentery and other debilitating illnesses. Nutritionally, it was a powerhouse. It provided a rapid infusion of calories from the residual sugars, a rich cocktail of B vitamins essential for energy metabolism, and beneficial probiotics from the live yeast that aided digestion. For a laborer, a ceramic jug of this beer was a practical, portable, and hydrating meal replacement that could be sipped throughout the long, hot hours of carving stone in a stuffy tomb, delivering a steady stream of energy without requiring a full stop to eat. This vital commodity was not simply a casual homemade drink, it was a formalized part of the state's economic engine. Workers like those at Deir el-Medina were paid through a sophisticated system of rations, and their wages literally came in the form of bread and beer. Archaeological records, including administrative papyri and Ostraka limestone flakes used as notepads, detail these payments with meticulous precision. A standard daily ration for a laborer might be 10 loaves of bread and 2 jugs of beer, with foremen and more skilled artisans receiving proportionally more. This was not a mere subsistence allowance, it was a calculated fuel supply. The state, in its profound understanding of human needs, was directly converting the agricultural surplus of the Nile Valley, the grain harvested from its fertile fields, into the physical energy required to build its monuments. The grain was processed in massive, state-run bakeries and breweries, some of which have been uncovered by archaeologists, showing an industrial scale of production. This system created a beautiful, circular economy. The fertility of the Nile produced the grain was transformed into bread and beer, and that bread and beer, in turn, powered the workforce that built the civilization that worshipped the Nile. The workers were not just building tombs, they were consuming the very essence of their land, a liquid incarnation of the river's bounty that flowed directly from the field to their hands, giving them the strength to achieve the impossible. Yet while bread and beer formed the energetic bedrock of their diet, a civilization cannot build monuments on carbohydrates alone. For the grueling, muscle-repairing work of hauling multi-ton stone blocks and carving intricate hieroglyphs, the body demands protein. And for the workers of ancient Egypt, this vital nutrient flowed directly from the life-giving waters of the Nile River in the form of fish. The Nile was not just a spiritual artery for the Egyptians, it was a sprawling, open-air supermarket, teeming with an almost unimaginable abundance of aquatic life. For the common laborer, this meant that a source of high-quality animal protein was not an unattainable luxury reserved for the elite, but a regular, accessible, and democratic part of their daily sustenance. The river's bounty was spectacularly diverse. Among the reeds and in the deeper channels, workers could expect to catch or be issued several staple species that are still familiar to us today. The mighty Nile perch was a prized catch, a large, meaty fish that could feed multiple families. The resilient catfish, with its distinctive whiskers and ability to survive in muddy conditions, was another common fixture on their menus. And then there was the ubiquitous tilapia, a smaller, prolific fish that was easily netted and provided a perfect individual portion. Tomb paintings and reliefs frequently depict scenes of fishing using nets, spears, and lines, proving that this was a massive, organized industry, not just a casual pastime. This wasn't a matter of a few individuals casting lines from the bank. This was a systematic harvest of the river's resources, orchestrated to feed a nation of builders. Of course, a major logistical challenge arose for those worker villages, like Deir el-Medina, that were situated a significant distance from the Nile's banks. In an era before refrigeration, how could this highly perishable resource be transported across miles of scorching desert without spoiling? The ancient Egyptians solved this problem with brilliant, practical methods of preservation that allowed the river's protein to reach even the most remote work sites. The most common technique was salting and drying. Fish would be gutted, split open, and heavily coated in salt, a precious commodity harvested from the lakes in the Nile Delta. They would then be laid out in the relentless sun and dry desert air, a process that drew out the moisture and created a durable, protein-rich jerky that could last for weeks or even months. Another method was pickling, where fish were packed tightly into jars and submerged in a salty brine, sometimes with the addition of herbs for flavor. This created a preserved, fermented product not unlike modern-day fermented fish sauces. These preservation techniques were a game-changer. They transformed a fleeting, seasonal resource into a storable, transportable commodity that could be distributed by the state as part of the official ration system. Archaeological evidence from Deir el-Medina confirms this, with finds of fish bones from multiple species and even the remains of salted fish in storage jars. This meant that a laborer high in the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings could sit down for his midday meal with a portion of dried, salted Nile perch, a loaf of his gritty bread, and a jug of thick beer. This combination provided a remarkably balanced diet, complex carbohydrates and B vitamins from the bread and beer for immediate and sustained energy, coupled with high-quality protein from the fish for muscle repair, strength, and long-term satiety. It was this powerful nutritional trifecta, bread, beer, and fish, that provided the complete physical fuel required to literally move mountains of stone and create the eternal monuments that still leave us in awe today. But the protein on a worker's plate didn't only come from the river. While cattle and goats were largely the domain of the wealthy and the temple sacrifices requiring vast grazing lands and significant investment, there was another, more accessible source of meat that thrived right in the heart of the workers' communities: poultry. Within the mud brick walls of villages like Deir el-Medina, the air would have been filled with the familiar sounds of domestic life, and among them, the distinctive quacking of ducks, the honking of geese, and the gentle cooing of pigeons. These birds were the unsung heroes of the commoner's diet, a walking, feathered larder that provided a crucial and regular supplement of animal protein and, just as importantly, valuable fat. Archaeology gives us a wonderfully clear picture of just how integrated these birds were into daily life. Excavations at workers' settlements have uncovered not just bones, but physical evidence of the infrastructure needed to keep them. We find limestone troughs that served as feeders and small, enclosed pens built right up against the houses, demonstrating that poultry keeping was a small-scale, household-level enterprise. This wasn't a massive, state-run operation like the grain distribution. This was personal. A family might keep a small flock of a half-dozen ducks or geese, letting them forage for scraps during the day and securing them in a pen at night to protect them from scavengers like jackals or wild cats. Pigeons, too, were an ingenious and space-efficient source of food. The Egyptians constructed elaborate dovecotes, tall, tower-like structures with hundreds of small nesting niches designed to attract and house these birds. Pigeons reproduce quickly and require very little space, making them an ideal, self-sustaining source of meat for a dense community. The nutritional value of these birds cannot be overstated. While fish provided lean protein, duck and goose offered something even more precious, a significant amount of fat. In a diet that was heavily based on carbohydrates from bread and beer, healthy fats were an essential source of concentrated energy and helped the body absorb fat-soluble vitamins. A roasted duck or goose was not just a meal, it was a calorie-dense feast, providing the kind of sustained energy needed for recovery after a brutal week of labor. And every part of the bird was utilized. The meat was roasted or stewed, often in large clay pots with whatever vegetables were on hand, like onions, leeks, or garlic, creating a hearty one-pot meal. The fat that rendered out during cooking was carefully saved, used for frying other foods or as a preservative. Even the eggs were a valuable commodity, collected and eaten as a quick, protein-rich food. This system of a small-scale husbandry represented a remarkable degree of self-sufficiency and dietary resilience for the workers. It meant that a family's protein intake wasn't entirely dependent on the state's ration system or the success of a fishing expedition. It provided a layer of nutritional security and variety that elevated their diet far above mere subsistence. The presence of these birds in their backyards transformed their homes from simple shelters into productive, integrated units of a sophisticated food economy, proving that even the most humble of livestock could play a monumental role in fueling the hands that built an empire. Moving beyond the steady supply of fish and poultry, we encounter a more complex and surprising element of the worker's diet, red meat. While the image of a grand Egyptian feast might conjure up visions of whole roasted oxen, the reality for the average laborer was far more nuanced, shaped by both practical economics and deep-seated cultural taboos. Let's start with the most unexpected staple, pork. In the worldview of the Egyptian elite, as recorded in their texts and tomb decorations, the pig was often viewed with a degree of distaste. It was considered an unclean animal, associated with the chaotic god set, and largely absent from the offering lists presented to the gods. This has led many to assume that pork was universally avoided. However, archaeology paints a completely different and much more flavorful picture for the working class. At major worker settlements, including the purpose-built city of Amarna, excavators have found enormous quantities of pig bones scattered in the residential areas. But this wasn't just random refuse, it points to a highly organized industry. At Amarna, researchers have identified specific districts with housing designed to accommodate pigs on the ground floor, with the family living above, a clear sign of specialized small-scale husbandry. Pigs were the perfect proletarian protein source. They are incredibly efficient converters of waste into meat, able to thrive on kitchen scraps and organic refuse that would otherwise be discarded. They reproduce quickly and require less dedicated grazing land than cattle or goats. For a worker's family, raising a pig or two in a pen behind the house provided a reliable and substantial source of rich, fatty meat without requiring the vast resources of the state. This stark divide between elite religious ideology and commoner practice is a powerful reminder that what was written down by the scribes often reflected the ideals of the upper classes, not the gritty, practical realities of daily life for the millions who built their world. In direct contrast to the commonality of pork stood beef, the true and undeniable luxury of the ancient Egyptian table, cattle were walking wealth. They required enormous tracts of fertile pastureland to graze, a resource that was always in high demand for growing the state's essential grain supplies. Raising a cow from birth to slaughter was a long, expensive investment of time and land, making its meat exponentially more valuable than that of a pig, duck, or fish. Because of this, beef was almost entirely the domain of the royalty, the high priesthood, and the nobility. For a common laborer, consuming beef was not a regular part of life. It was a rare and momentous occasion, a tangible gift from the state that underscored their value and service. There is compelling evidence that the distribution of beef was a calculated act, used as a powerful incentive and reward. During the construction of a royal tomb or the completion of a major phase of work on a pyramid, the state might organize a grand feast for the workforce. On these special festival days, cattle would be slaughtered in significant numbers, and cuts of prime beef would be distributed according to rank and accomplishment. Imagine the scene. After months of grueling labor, the entire community gathers. The air, usually filled with the dust of stone and the smell of baking bread, is now rich with the aroma of roasting beef. For a day, the workers and their families would eat like kings, sharing in a bounty that was directly tied to their own monumental efforts. This was more than just a meal, it was a powerful piece of political and social theater. It transformed the workers from mere cogs in a state machine into honored participants in a grand national project, their physical strength literally rewarded with the ultimate symbol of earthly prosperity. So, while their daily diet was a masterclass in practical nutrition, these occasional feasts on pork and, more spectacularly, beef, provided the psychological and social fuel, the feeling of being valued and celebrated, that was just as crucial for maintaining morale and ensuring the steady, rhythmic progress of work that defined ancient Egypt's most ambitious ages. But while bread, beer, and protein formed the core of their physical fuel, the ancient Egyptian kitchen had a powerful secret weapon to make this hearty fare truly sing with flavor. No worker's meal was complete without the pungent, aromatic bite of what we might call the Egyptian Holy Trinity: onions, garlic, and leeks. These three alliums were not just occasional garnishes, they were fundamental, indispensable pillars of daily cuisine, as ubiquitous in their storage jars as the grain for their bread. Imagine the scene inside a mud-brick home at Deir el-Medina, a woven basket brimming with earthy, paper-skinned onions, a braided string of pungent garlic bulbs hanging from a ceiling beam, and a bundle of fresh, green leeks leaning in the corner, ready to be chopped. Their presence was so vital that they were listed among the standard rations issued to state workers, right alongside their loaves of bread and jugs of beer. They understood that a diet, no matter how nutritious, needed to be palatable to be sustainable over a lifetime of hard labor, and these humble vegetables provided the zesty, robust character that turned simple sustenance into a satisfying meal. The value of these alliums, however, extended far beyond their ability to make a gritty loaf of bread or a fish stew more exciting. They were, in their own right, powerful nutritional powerhouses that filled critical gaps in their diet. Onions and leeks provided a valuable source of vitamin C, a crucial nutrient that is not found in grains. In a land without citrus fruits, this was their primary defense against scurvy, a disease that would have crippled a workforce reliant on physical strength. Garlic, meanwhile, was packed with manganese, vitamin B6, and other trace minerals essential for bone health and energy metabolism. Every crunchy, pungent bite was delivering a microdose of essential vitamins, contributing to overall health and resilience in a challenging environment. They were, in effect, the ancient world's original multivitamin, a natural supplement woven directly into the fabric of their daily meals. This practical understanding of their benefits bled directly into the realm of medicine, as recorded in fascinating detail in surviving papyri like the Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest and most complete medical texts from ancient Egypt. The priests and physicians of the time, who were often one and the same, documented a staggering array of medicinal uses for these common vegetables, prescribing them with an almost modern-sounding logic. Garlic was revered as a tonic for strength and vitality. Laborers and soldiers were given massive doses of it before embarking on strenuous campaigns or projects, believing it could ward off fatigue and increase endurance, a belief modern science partially supports, as garlic is known to support cardiovascular health. It was also used as a poultice for infections and as a remedy for digestive ailments. Raw onion juice was considered a potent treatment for colds and coughs, and slices of onion were applied to insect bites and scorpion stings to draw out venom and reduce swelling. Leeks were frequently used to soothe sore throats and were thought to be beneficial for the voice. While some of their prescribed remedies were intertwined with magic and incantations, the core recognition of these plants' antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties was remarkably astute. So how did this flavorful, medicinal trinity actually make its way onto a worker's plate? The methods were as straightforward and practical as the people themselves. The most common way to eat an onion or a clove of garlic was simply raw. A laborer heading out for his shift could easily tuck a small onion and a few garlic cloves into his satchel alongside his bread. During a break, he would peel the onion with his knife, bite into its sharp, crisp flesh, and use it as a pungent accompaniment to his loaf, the intense flavor cutting through the blandness of the bread and cleansing the palate. Garlic cloves could be crushed and mixed with a little oil or water to create a primitive, fiery paste for dipping. In the home kitchen, these ingredients formed the foundational flavor base for nearly every cooked dish. A typical family stew would begin with chopped onions and garlic being sautéed in a clay pot over a fire, their aroma filling the single room of the house. To this base, chunks of fish or poultry would be added, along with water and perhaps some lentils or peas, then left to simmer for hours into a hearty, one-pot meal. Leeks, with their milder, sweeter flavor when cooked, were often chopped and added directly to porridges or bean dishes, providing texture and a subtle, onion-like essence. From the highest priest to the humblest laborer, the distinctive, sharp scent of these alliums would have been a constant, comforting, and vital thread in the daily tapestry of life, proving that the flavor of an empire was built not only on grand staples, but on the powerfully pungent, life-sustaining strength of the onion, the garlic, and the leek. Beyond the pungent, essential world of onions, garlic, and leeks lay an entire garden of other vegetables and legumes that brought color, texture, and crucial nutritional complexity to the workers' plates. While the state supplied rations of grain, fish, and beer formed the non-negotiable backbone of their diet, this secondary tier of plant-based foods provided the vital dietary fiber, micronutrients, and variety that turned simple sustenance into true health and resilience. Lentils, for instance, were an absolute staple, a tiny but mighty nutritional powerhouse. These small, lens-shaped pulses were a brilliant source of plant-based protein, offering a crucial alternative or supplement to fish on days when the catch was scarce or the ration didn't include it. But their value went far deeper. Lentils are packed with iron, a mineral essential for carrying oxygen in the blood and preventing anemia, a critical concern for people engaged in relentless physical labor. They are also rich in folate, another B vitamin vital for cell growth and repair, and they provided a substantial amount of dietary fiber that aided digestion and promoted a feeling of fullness, complementing the roughage from their coarse, whole grain bread. Alongside lentils, the archaeological record reveals a surprising variety of other legumes gracing their storage pots. Fava beans, also known as broad beans, were another common find, offering a similar profile of protein and fiber. Chickpeas, too, have been identified at sites, likely boiled into soft, savory stews or even ground into a primitive form of hummus. Then there were the refreshing, water-rich vegetables that provided crisp texture and essential vitamins. The humble radish, with its sharp, peppery bite, was a common garden crop, easy to grow and perfect for eating raw as a quick, crunchy snack. Lettuce, which the Egyptians associated with the god of fertility, Min, was not the delicate leafy green we think of today, but a taller, more robust plant, likely eaten cooked rather than in salads to avoid waterborne contaminants. And of course, the cucumber, a brilliant source of hydration and a refreshing counterpoint to their heavy, dense bread, would have been a welcome sight in the heat of the summer months. Each of these plants contributed its own unique set of vitamins and minerals: vitamin K from the lettuce, vitamin C from the radishes and cucumbers, potassium from the beans, creating a diverse nutritional safety net that protected them from the deficiency diseases that could have crippled a less well-fed workforce. This access to fresh produce wasn't just a matter of lucky finds in the market. For many workers, it was a direct result of their own initiative and resourcefulness. Evidence from villages like Deir el-Medina shows that the inhabitants didn't just live in their houses, they actively cultivated the space around them. While the state provided the core rations, the workers and their families took it upon themselves to supplement their diet by creating small, intensively managed garden plots right outside their mud brick homes. In the limited space between houses or in any available patch of earth, they would have grown these essential vegetables and legumes. They practiced a form of small-scale, sustainable agriculture, using every drop of precious water efficiently, perhaps even recycling gray water from their household tasks to irrigate their plants. These kitchen gardens were a testament to their practical understanding of nutrition and their drive for self-sufficiency. They knew that a handful of lentils could stretch a fish stew to feed more mouths, that a fresh cucumber could quench a child's thirst, and that the vitamins from these homegrown foods kept their families healthier and stronger. This practice transformed their living space from a mere dormitory into a productive homestead, adding a deeply personal and autonomous layer to the state-controlled food system. The ability to step outside one's door and pick a fresh radish or harvest a basket of beans provided not just nutritional insurance, but also a sense of agency and connection to the land, a small, tangible piece of self-reliance in the heart of a vast, orchestrated civilization. Beyond the savory realm of stews and bread, life along the Nile offered a deliciously sweet reprieve, a testament to the river's generosity that extended even to the hardest working members of society. While we might imagine such treats as luxuries, fruits were a vital and integrated part of the nutritional landscape, providing essential sugars for quick energy, dense calories, and a welcome burst of natural flavor that broke the monotony of their daily fare. This was the sweet life, powered by the sun-drenched orchards and palm groves that flourished in the fertile soil of the riverbanks, and it was far more accessible to the common laborer than one might assume. The undisputed king of this sweet bounty was the date. This humble fruit was nothing short of a nutritional marvel, a powerhouse of energy perfectly suited to the demands of physical labor. Ripening in heavy, golden brown clusters from the towering date palms that dotted the landscape, they were a concentrated source of simple sugars like glucose and fructose. For a worker in the midst of a grueling task, consuming a handful of dates was like injecting pure, rapid-release energy directly into their system, providing an almost immediate boost to stave off fatigue. But their value didn't end there. Dates were also surprisingly rich in potassium, a critical electrolyte lost through sweat, and provided a good amount of dietary fiber to aid digestion. The true genius, however, lay in their incredible shelf life. The arid Egyptian climate was a natural dehydrator. Dates were harvested and simply laid out in the sun, where they would dry naturally, their moisture evaporating to leave behind a chewy, intensely sweet, and perfectly preserved product. This transformation meant that dates were available year-round, not just during their harvest season. A laborer could carry a small pouch of these dried dates in his satchel, and they would remain edible for months, serving as the perfect, non-perishable, high-energy snack to munch on during a mid-morning break while high on a pyramid ramp or deep inside a tomb. They were the ancient world's equivalent of an energy bar, compact, durable, and packed with fuel. Joining the date in this seasonal symphony of sweetness was the venerable fig. Cultivated in gardens and harvested from the distinctive, broad-leaved fig trees, this soft, teardrop-shaped fruit offered a different texture and flavor profile. While not as sugar-dense as the date, the fig was a source of more complex carbohydrates and was valued for its delicate, honey-like taste. Its season was relatively short, making fresh figs a special, ephemeral treat. But like dates, figs could also be easily preserved by sun drying, which concentrated their sugars and allowed their delicate flavor to be enjoyed long after the harvest had passed. Then there were the grapes, cultivated in lush vineyards that were often owned by the state or wealthy temples. During the late summer harvest, workers would have had access to fresh grapes, a juicy, hydrating, and refreshing luxury. But the real culinary innovation came from drying a portion of the harvest. By laying grapes out on mats in the hot sun, they would slowly shrivel and transform into raisins. This process, much like with dates, concentrated the natural sugars, creating another incredibly durable, portable, and calorie-dense snack. A handful of raisins provided a similar quick energy boost to dates, but with a unique, tangy, sweet flavor that offered variety. For a laborer on the move, these dried fruits were indispensable. They required no preparation, wouldn't spoil in the heat, and delivered a powerful caloric punch in a very small, lightweight package. Perhaps the most intriguing fruit available to them was the sycamore fig, a variety distinct from the common fig. This tree held a special place in Egyptian religion and mythology, often associated with the goddess Hathor, the Lady of the Sycamore, who is believed to offer shade, sustenance, and even refreshment to the dead in the afterlife. But its theological significance was matched by its practical, earthly value. The sycamore fig is smaller and somewhat less sweet than its cultivated cousin, but it was incredibly abundant and hardy. The trees were widely grown, and their fruit, though requiring more effort to harvest, provided a reliable, seasonal source of nutrition for commoners. The Egyptians would often eat the fruit fresh, but they also had a clever method for improving its flavor and preserving it. They would slice the figs in half and place them on elevated racks to dry in the sun and desert wind, a technique that helped concentrate their modest sugars and made them a staple in the pantry of an average household. The widespread presence of these fruits in the diet demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of seasonal harvests and food preservation. It reveals a society that efficiently captured the fleeting sweetness of summer and transformed it into a stable, year-round resource, ensuring that even the most strenuous labor was sweetened by the natural bounty of their beloved Nile. Now, let's step inside the home of one of these workers and see exactly how this diverse and nourishing diet was transformed from raw ingredients into the daily meals that fueled history. The ancient Egyptian kitchen was a masterpiece of practical simplicity, a space devoid of modern gadgetry but brimming with ingenuity. Forget stainless steel appliances and electric ovens, this was a world of earth, fire, and stone. The heart of any home was its hearth, often a simple, fire-proofed area on the floor or a raised mud brick platform. The air would have been thick with the comforting smells of baking bread, simmering stews, and the smoky tang of burning acacia wood or dried animal dung, which was a common and efficient fuel. Light would have filtered in through small, high windows, illuminating a toolkit that was basic, durable, and perfectly adapted to the tasks at hand. Central to this entire operation were the indispensable grinding stones, the saddle querns we discussed earlier. These were not stored away in a cupboard, but were a permanent fixture, a heavy slab of sandstone that was the first and most laborious stop on the journey from grain to meal. Next to it would be a collection of coarse ceramic pots in various sizes, deep, globular jars for storing grain or water, wide-mouthed pots for mixing dough and slow-cooking stews, and smaller jugs for holding beer and oils. Then there was the oven, which for most communities was a shared resource. These beehive-shaped clay ovens, standing about waist-high, were the communal powerhouses of the village, their exteriors blackened by soot, and their interiors radiating a dry, intense heat that could bake dozens of loaves at a time. This toolkit, though primitive by our standards, was a highly refined system that had been perfected over centuries to efficiently process the bounty of the Nile into life-sustaining food. The cooking methods they employed were a direct reflection of their tools and resources, focusing on techniques that maximized flavor, preserved nutrients, and made the most of every single ingredient. Boiling and stewing were undoubtedly the most common forms of cooking, and for excellent reasons. Firstly, it was incredibly fuel efficient. A single fire could be built underneath a large ceramic pot, and a hearty stew containing fish, lentils, onions, and garlic could be left to simmer for hours, gently cooking everything to tenderness while the family went about their day. This slow, moist heat was perfect for tenderizing tougher cuts of meat, like older poultry, and for thoroughly cooking legumes, which could be difficult to digest if not prepared properly. Secondly, this method created a complete one-pot meal. Nothing was wasted. The cooking liquid itself, enriched with the flavors and nutrients from all the ingredients, became a nourishing broth that was sopped up with chunks of bread. Imagine a worker returning home after a long, dusty day. His wife would lift the lid from the pot hanging over the embers, and the steam would release an aromatic cloud of garlic, leek, and fish, a promise of a warm, satisfying meal that required only a bowl and a piece of bread to enjoy fully. This wasn't just cooking, it was a practical and intelligent system of food preparation that conserved energy, time, and ingredients. Baking, of course, was the other pillar of their culinary world, but it looked nothing like our modern process of preheating a box-shaped oven. The design of their beehive ovens was brilliantly effective. A fire would be lit inside the hollow chamber, heating the thick clay walls until they glowed with stored thermal energy. Once the fire had burned down to embers, these would be scraped out, and the interior walls would be wiped clean. The shaped loaves of dough were then slapped directly onto the hot interior surface, where they would adhere and bake quickly from the radiant heat. The result was a crusty exterior and a dense, chewy interior, a loaf built for sustenance, not for softness. For foods that didn't require such intense, dry heat, roasting was another option, often done over the open embers of the hearth. Ducks or geese could be spitted on a long stick and turned slowly over the fire, their fat dripping and sizzling, filling the home with an irresistible aroma. Fish could be wrapped in clay or leaves and nestled right in the coals, steaming in their own juices. Frying, while less common due to the value of oil, was also practiced. A flat stone or a shallow ceramic dish could be heated over the fire, with a little precious oil or saved poultry fat used to fry eggs, small fish, or pancakes made from grain. Each of these methods, from the slow simmer of the stew pot to the fierce blast of the bread oven, showcased a deep understanding of how to harness simple elements to create a complex and resilient cuisine, proving that the true sophistication of their food culture lay not in exotic ingredients, but in the masterful, time-tested application of heat and ingenuity. So let's bring all of these ingredients and culinary practices together to paint a complete picture of a worker's day, meal by meal, from the first light of dawn to the quiet of the evening. Imagine it's a typical workday in Deir el-Medina. The sky is just beginning to lighten over the eastern cliffs, and the air is still cool. Inside a mud brick home, the family begins to stir. There's no time for cooking an elaborate breakfast. The work crew will be assembling soon for the long climb to the tomb site. The first meal of the day is, therefore, a swift and practical affair, a literal breaking of the night's fast. The worker likely grabs a leftover loaf of bread from the previous evening, its dense, gritty texture unchanged from the day before. Alongside it, he drinks directly from a jug of the family's daily beer ration. This thick, nutrient-rich brew serves as both a beverage and a light morning meal in itself, providing immediate hydration and a quick start of calories and B vitamins to wake up the system. This combination of leftover bread and beer is the ancient equivalent of a modern quick breakfast, portable, efficient, and designed to provide a foundational burst of energy for the arduous hours ahead. There's no ceremony to it. It's fuel, pure and simple, consumed quickly before heading out the door to join his crew. The sun is now high and fierce, beating down on the stark limestone cliffs of the Valley of the Kings. It's midday, and the worker, along with his companions, takes a well-earned break from the back-breaking labor of chiseling and hauling within the tomb. This is not a lunch hour spent at a comfortable table. It's a respite taken right there at the worksite, in whatever sliver of shade can be found. The midday meal is, by necessity, completely portable and durable. Our worker reaches into the simple satchel he carried up from the village. From it, he pulls out a carefully wrapped packet containing his lunch, another loaf of his sturdy bread, a piece of dried, salted fish, perhaps Nile perch that has been preserved to a jerky-like consistency, and a small, raw onion. This is a meal built for power and endurance. The bread provides the sustained carbohydrate energy. The dried fish delivers a potent dose of protein and salt to replenish what he has lost through sweat and to help repair his straining muscles, and the raw onion offers a crisp, pungent burst of flavor and a dose of vitamin C. He might wash it all down with sips from his personal water skin, or, more likely, from a dedicated jug of beer, which continues to hydrate him safely in the intense heat. This is functional eating at its most efficient. Every component is self-contained, non-perishable for the duration of the day, and nutritionally targeted to refuel his body without slowing him down. He eats with his hands, chatting with his fellow artisans, the shared simplicity of the meal reinforcing the camaraderie of their shared, monumental task. But the day is not over. As the sun begins to dip below the western horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, the worker makes the trek back down to the village. The cool of the evening brings a shift in pace and purpose. Now he returns not to a work site, but to a home. This is when the main and most important meal of the day unfolds. The evening meal is a family affair, a time for connection and a more leisurely replenishment. The single room of the house is filled with the deeply comforting aroma of a stew that has been simmering for hours in a large clay pot over the hearth. His wife or other family members have spent the afternoon preparing this dish. The base is likely a mixture of lentils and fava beans, which have softened into a thick, hearty consistency. Into this, they have added chopped onions, garlic, and leeks, their sharpness mellowed by the long, slow cooking process. For protein, perhaps some chunks of duck from their own small flock or a piece of fresh fish acquired that day have been added, infusing the pot with their rich flavors. The stew is a masterpiece of resourcefulness, a one-pot wonder that stretches precious ingredients, captures all their nutrients in the savory broth, and requires only a single source of fuel to cook. The family gathers around, sitting on mats on the floor. The stew is ladled into simple bowls. The worker tears off a large piece of fresh, warm bread, baked that morning in the communal oven, and uses it to scoop up the thick, savory mixture. He sips from a cup of beer, this time enjoying it more for its taste and the feeling of relaxation it brings after a hard day's work. This is more than just nutrition, it is a ritual of family and community. The conversation turns to the events of the day, the children's activities, the gossip of the village. The meal is slower, more social, and profoundly satisfying. It provides the final, substantial calorie load needed for his body to recover overnight and rebuild the muscle tissue broken down during his labor. The combination of protein from the meat or fish, complex carbohydrates and fiber from the bread and legumes, and the full spectrum of vitamins from the vegetables creates a complete nutritional package for recovery and health. This evening stew, shared with loved ones in the gentle light of an oil lamp, represents the true culmination of the ancient Egyptian food system, a system that understood not only how to fuel the body for monumental labor, but also how to nourish the spirit through the simple, profound act of a shared meal. But how can we be so sure about these daily scenes of grinding grain, brewing beer, and cooking stews, considering these workers left few written records of their own? Our most vivid window into their culinary world comes, ironically, from the tombs of the very elite they served. The ancient Egyptians held a powerful, unshakable belief that life in the afterlife was a direct continuation of life on earth, and to enjoy that eternal existence, the deceased would need a perpetual supply of food and drink. Since they couldn't take the actual bakers and brewers with them, they devised a clever and beautiful solution. They would cover the walls of their tombs with detailed paintings and reliefs depicting every stage of food production, magically activating these scenes to provide for them forever. While these artworks were created for nobility and present an idealized, orderly vision of an estate running like clockwork, they are, in fact, a treasure trove of accurate, practical information. The artists who painted these scenes were the same men who lived in workers' villages like Deir el-Medina. They were illustrating the very world they knew intimately. So when we look at these images, we are not just seeing an aristocrat's fantasy, we are getting a meticulously observed documentary of the tools, techniques, and teamwork that defined the ancient Egyptian kitchen. One of the most common and informative scenes is the depiction of a bakery and brewery, often shown as two halves of a single, integrated operation. In the tomb of Ramses III, for example, we see a bustling, rhythmic production line. On one side, men are shown vigorously pounding grain in tall wooden mortars to separate the husks, their bodies arched with the effort. Next to them, women are kneeling in a familiar, arduous posture, grinding the grain on saddle querns, their backs to us, focused on their task. The artist captures the physicality of the work, the strain, and the repetition. The ground flour is then shown being mixed in large jars and shaped into conical loaves. These are not the simple, flat discs we might imagine. The paintings show a variety of shapes: cones, ovals, and even plated loaves, being placed carefully into beehive-shaped ovens. The brewers, working in concert, are depicted crumbling partially baked loaves of a distinct, reddish bread into large vats, adding water, and then straining the fermented result into tall jars, which are then sealed with clay stoppers. The level of detail is astonishing. We can see the different styles of pottery used, the tools for stirring and straining, and even the labels on the jars denoting the type of beer. This isn't generic symbolism, it is a precise, technical diagram of a state-run production facility, confirming the scale and organization we deduce from archaeological finds. Beyond bread and beer, these tomb walls come alive with the sights and sounds of a full-scale food industry. In the tomb of Tai at Saqqara, a magnificent relief shows a bustling butcher's yard. Here, we see the stark hierarchy of meat consumption laid bare. Strong men are depicted leading a massive, healthy bull, its horns held firmly. In a subsequent scene, the animal is humanely dispatched and then skillfully butchered. The artists show every step with clinical precision, the careful skinning of the hide, the precise dismemberment of the carcass into prime cuts of beef, the haunch, the ribs, the head, and the removal of the internal organs. This scene powerfully reinforces the status of beef as the ultimate luxury, a food fit for a noble's afterlife, but the same tombs also show the more common sources of protein. In the tomb of Nebamun, a lively, colorful fresco captures a fowling scene in the marshes, while the noble stands elegantly in a papyrus skiff, his family beside him. The real action is in the teeming wildlife. The artist has rendered a chaotic, beautiful ecosystem of birds, ducks, geese, and teal taking flight in a panic. This scene, meant to show the deceased's prowess and enjoyment of life, inadvertently provides us with an illustrated catalog of the very poultry that was raised in the workers' villages, confirming the importance of ducks and geese in the wider diet. Perhaps the most charming and direct sources of all are the wooden models placed in tombs. These three-dimensional dioramas were designed to magically spring to life and serve the deceased for eternity. A spectacular example from the tomb of Mekheder, a royal chancellor, includes a stunningly detailed model of a bakery and brewery. Unlike the two-dimensional paintings, this model allows us to peer into a miniature workshop. We can see tiny figures, barely a few inches high, frozen in their tasks. One woman kneels, grinding grain on a perfectly sculpted saddle quern. Another carefully tends a fire under a brewing vat. A man carries a sack of grain on his shoulders. The model includes miniature milling stones, pots, and ovens, all crafted to scale. Another model from the same tomb shows a bustling butcher's shop, with figures slaughtering a cow and preparing the cuts. The visceral, tangible nature of these models makes the ancient food industry feel immediate and real. They are not idealized portraits, they are functional, mechanical blueprints for the afterlife, and in their meticulous craftsmanship, they preserve the everyday reality of the workers, their postures, their tools, and the organized chaos of their workshops, with a fidelity that pure archaeology alone could never achieve. Together, the tomb paintings and these wooden models form a priceless collaborative record. They were created by the hands of skilled artisans for the eyes of the gods and the elite, but in their enduring clarity, they speak most eloquently to us about the hands that built them, the daily grind, the shared labor, and the remarkable culinary world of the common people who fed a civilization. All of these rich descriptions of food and daily life would remain just educated guesses, however, without the hard, physical proof that confirms them. This is where the fascinating science of archaeology takes over, transforming our theories into concrete fact. The evidence isn't just hidden in grand tombs, it's buried in the most mundane places imaginable: the ancient garbage dumps, the dusty floors of abandoned homes, and even in the very bones of the workers themselves. Through a suite of sophisticated scientific techniques, we can now analyze the residue of meals eaten 4,000 years ago, reconstruct their menus from discarded scraps, and read the story of their diet etched into their skeletons. This evidence overwhelmingly paints a consistent picture. This was not a starved, brutalized workforce, but a population that was remarkably well-nourished, robust, and healthy. Let's start with the artifacts they left behind. In every worker's village, archaeologists sift through the layers of accumulated debris, finding broken pottery by the thousands. To the untrained eye, these are just shattered pieces of clay, but to a specialist in residue analysis, they are tiny time capsules. Scientists can now take a shard from a cooking pot and, using chemical analysis, detect the microscopic fats and lipids that were absorbed into the porous ceramic during cooking. These lipid traces are like chemical fingerprints, uniquely identifying the foods that were once simmered in that vessel. Through this method, we have direct confirmation that these pots were used to cook fish, specifically Nile catfish and perch. We can find residues from the fats of ducks and geese. We can even detect the presence of dairy products in some contexts, suggesting that milk or cheese, perhaps from goats, was occasionally part of their diet. This isn't inference from a painting. This is the chemical ghost of a family's evening stew, preserved for millennia and now telling us exactly what was on the menu. Then there's the evidence found in their trash heaps, a field known as zooarchaeology. By meticulously collecting, identifying, and counting every animal bone fragment from an ancient garbage pit, we can build a statistical profile of what people were eating most often. At Deir el-Medina and other worker sites, these bone assemblages are incredibly revealing. The most common finds are fish bones, vertebrae, and skulls from tilapia, catfish, and Nile perch, often bearing cut marks from being filleted. Right alongside them are the bones of ducks and geese, showing clear signs of butchery and cooking, and then, perhaps most tellingly, are the abundant remains of pigs. The sheer volume of pig bones in these residential areas, complete with evidence that they were raised and slaughtered on site, proves that this was a staple meat for the working class, completely bypassing the elite religious taboos. These middens are the ultimate democratic record. They don't show what the state wanted people to eat for ideological reasons, but what people actually chose to eat and throw away in the privacy of their own homes. But a diet isn't just about meat. To understand the full spectrum of their nutrition, we turn to paleoethnobotany, the study of ancient plant remains. Through a process called flotation, archaeologists pour soil samples from ancient storage bins, hearths, and even the cracks in the floor through water. The heavy material sinks, but the tiny, preserved seeds and plant fragments float to the surface, where they can be collected and identified under a microscope. This painstaking work has recovered a veritable farmer's market of ingredients from workers' homes: grains of emmer wheat and barley, lentil seeds, chickpeas, fava beans, and the seeds of onions, garlic, and leeks. We have found date pits and fig seeds, confirming that these fruits were indeed consumed and their waste discarded. This botanical evidence completes the picture, showing us the trinity of carbohydrates, proteins, and vitamins that formed the foundation of their health. It proves that their meals were built on a diverse and sophisticated understanding of plant-based nutrition, far beyond simple bread. Yet the most personal and compelling evidence of all comes not from what they threw away, but from their own bodies. Osteoarchaeology, the study of human skeletons, gives us a direct biological ledger of a person's life. When we examine the remains from the cemeteries of Giza and Deir el-Medina, the story told by the bones is startlingly clear. These were strong, physically powerful individuals. The points where major muscles attach to the bone, the shoulders, the upper arms, the thighs, are often dramatically developed, marked by heavy ridges and robust structures. This is clear evidence of a lifetime of intense, repetitive physical labor, of muscles that were constantly used and built up to an extraordinary degree. Their bones show a general pattern of good health, with few signs of the dietary deficiencies like rickets or scurvy that would have been evident if their diet were poor. The evidence of severe dental wear from gritty bread is certainly there, but interestingly, there is relatively little evidence of cavities. Their low-sugar diet, devoid of the processed sweets we know today, largely protected them from tooth decay. Perhaps the most significant osteoarchaeological finding comes from analyzing the chemical composition of their bones themselves, a technique called stable isotope analysis. Our bodies are literally made from the food we eat, and different foods leave distinct chemical signatures in our bones. By testing the collagen preserved in the skeletons of the pyramid builders, scientists can determine the relative proportions of different food groups in their diet over the last decade or so of their lives. The results have been unequivocal. The isotopic signature shows a diet heavily based on C3 plants, which include emmer wheat and barley, consistent with their high bread consumption. But crucially, it also reveals a very significant intake of protein from freshwater sources, a direct match for the Nile fish we find in their trash heaps. The data shows they were consuming a substantial amount of animal protein, likely split between fish and poultry, at a level that would be considered healthy even by modern standards. This scientific analysis is the final, undeniable nail in the coffin of the old, starved slave narrative. It proves that the workers were provided with a diet rich in calories, protein, and essential nutrients, a diet that was purposefully engineered to maintain their strength and vitality through decades of the most demanding physical work imaginable. Their skeletons stand as silent, powerful witnesses to the fact that the hands that built the wonders of the ancient world were hands attached to bodies that were well-fed, resilient, and cared for in a way that enabled them to achieve the impossible. All of this evidence culminates in one extraordinary place that allows us to move beyond generalities and truly walk the dusty streets of an ancient workers' world, the village of Deir el-Medina. Nestled in a secluded valley on the west bank of the Nile, across from modern-day Luxor, this wasn't just any settlement, it was a purpose-built company town for the most skilled artisans of the New Kingdom, the very men who carved and painted the magnificent tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Its isolation, meant to protect the pharaoh's burial secrets, is precisely what preserved its story so perfectly for us. Here, we don't just have bones and broken pots, we have their own voices, their grocery lists, their pay stubs, and their official complaints, all scratched onto flakes of limestone and pottery known as ostraka. These weren't formal documents for eternity, like the Grand Tomb inscriptions. These were the disposable notepads of daily life, tossed aside once their message was received, and they provide an astoundingly intimate, real-time window into the economy and diet that powered this civilization's most ambitious projects. The administrative records from Deir el-Medina are breathtakingly meticulous. The state operated on a sophisticated ration system, and these ostraka served as the official receipts and payroll ledgers. They detailed with bureaucratic precision the monthly or weekly distributions to the workforce. A standard entry might record that the draftsman Naktamut received 10 loaves of bread, 2 jugs of beer, a bundle of fish, a portion of vegetables, and even a measure of grain or oil for his lamp. These weren't arbitrary handouts, they were calculated wages, scaled according to skill and rank. A foreman or a senior scribe would receive a larger share than a junior laborer, creating a clear economic hierarchy within the village. What these lists prove is that the state provision was not merely about preventing starvation. It was a comprehensive, calibrated fuel supply designed to deliver a balanced diet. The carbohydrates from the bread and beer, the protein from the fish, and the essential vitamins from the vegetables were all part of a state-mandated nutritional plan. This system ensured that every worker had the baseline energy and health required to perform their highly specialized, physically demanding tasks, day after day, year after year. The rations were so reliable and substantial that they formed the bedrock of a vibrant internal market. This is where the story gets truly fascinating, because the people of Deir el-Medina were not passive recipients of state aid, they were active, savvy economic players. The Ostraker reveal a bustling informal economy, a marketplace of barter and exchange that flourished between the houses. A worker and his family might receive more fish than they could eat before it spoiled, or they might have a small surplus of beer from their own household brewing. So they would trade. One Ostrakan might be a simple memo: give the porter Penub these 3 fresh fish. In exchange, he is to deliver 1 jar of good quality fat. Another might record a transaction of bread for a wooden stool crafted by the village carpenter, or a pot of honey for a pair of leather sandals. These documents show a remarkable level of economic agency. They weren't just building tombs for the pharaoh, they were building lives for themselves, using their state-issued rations as capital to acquire goods and services that improved their daily existence. This internal market created a layer of economic resilience and social cohesion, turning a state-sponsored workforce into a genuine community where neighbors relied on each other not just for camaraderie, but for the material comforts of life. All of this makes the most dramatic evidence from Deir el-Medina so powerful and understandable. The system was efficient, but it was not infallible. And when it failed, the workers did something that shatters any lingering image of cowed, passive slaves. They went on strike. The records from the reign of Ramses Roman III in the 12th century B.C.E. provide a stunning account of history's first recorded labor strikes, and the cause was unequivocally food. The administrative ostraka from this period tell a story of growing frustration. The state's grain stores in the nearby city of Thebes were mismanaged, or deliveries were delayed by corrupt officials, leading to the rations, their literal wages arriving late or not at all. The workers, led by their foreman, made the extraordinary decision to lay down their tools. They did not march to the tombs. Instead, they staged a sit-in at the local temples, the seats of administrative and divine power, chanting and demanding what they were owed. One remarkable Ostrakan records their powerful plea: "We have come here because we are hungry and thirsty. We have no clothes, no fish, no vegetables. Write to Pharaoh our good lord about it, and write to the vizier, our superior, so that we may be supplied with provisions." This was not a reckless riot, it was a calculated, organized labor action by respected state employees who knew their own value. They were leveraging their irreplaceable skills to demand the fulfillment of a contractual agreement, and it worked. The state, terrified of the eternal consequences of halting the pharaoh's tomb construction, consistently capitulated, sending emergency supplies of bread, fish, and vegetables to get the workers back on the job. These strikes are the ultimate testament to the central role of food. They prove that the workers' diet was not a trivial matter of subsistence, but the very currency of their labor and the foundation of their power. They understood that the state needed their hands just as much as they needed the state's bread, and they were willing to halt the most sacred project in Egypt to secure their fair share. Now we come to the brilliant economic engine that made this entire system possible, the state's sophisticated ration system, a form of compensation so integral that it literally built the pyramids. Forget modern paychecks and direct deposits. For the ancient Egyptian worker, their salary arrived in the most tangible form imaginable, directly as the food they would eat that very day. This was the backbone of a redistributive economy, a masterful system where the state collected the agricultural surplus from the vast Nile farmlands, processed it in massive, centralized facilities, and then redistributed it as wages to the very people constructing its most ambitious projects. Imagine the state as a colossal heart, pumping the lifeblood of grain, fish, and vegetables through the economic arteries of the kingdom, with the workers' villages as the vital organs that converted this sustenance into physical labor and monumental achievement. The distribution of these rations was anything but haphazard. It was a highly organized, meticulously documented operation run with the precision of a modern corporation. At a village like Deir el-Medina, this process was the rhythm of life itself. The workforce was divided into two main gangs, the gang of the right and the gang of the left, each with its own foremen and scribes. On regular paydays, which often occurred monthly, these scribes would oversee the distribution based on detailed payroll lists scratched onto ostraka. The entire community would gather as officials from the state granary and treasury arrived with the goods. The air would be thick with anticipation and the bustling noise of organized commerce as donkeys laden with sacks of emmer wheat and barley, ceramic jars of beer, and baskets of dried fish were unloaded. The scribes holding their administrative notes would call out names to the draftsman: 10 loaves of bread, 2 jars of beer, a bundle of fish, and a measure of vegetables. Each worker or the head of each household would then step forward to receive their family's allotted share for the coming weeks. This was not a gift or a mere subsistence allowance. It was a formal wage, earned through skilled labor and paid in the most stable currency of the ancient world, food. What is truly striking about these rations is their calculated nutritional completeness. The state wasn't just handing out calories, it was providing a balanced diet specifically engineered for manual labor. The core of every payment was, of course, the grain, the raw material for the indispensable bread and beer that provided the foundational carbohydrates and calories. But it almost always included a protein source, most commonly fish from the Nile, ensuring a steady supply of the amino acids necessary for muscle repair and strength. Then came the vegetables: onions, garlic, leeks, and pulses like lentils, which supplied the essential vitamins and fiber that prevented deficiency diseases and promoted overall health. On top of this, workers periodically received other valuable commodities: lumps of natron salt for preserving food and seasoning, a measure of oil for cooking and lamps, and occasionally, as a special reward, a cut of meat. This was a comprehensive provisioning system that demonstrated a profound, practical understanding of human nutritional needs. The administrators of the new kingdom knew that a workforce suffering from scurvy or anemia would be incapable of the precision and endurance needed to carve a royal tomb. By providing this varied diet, they were making a direct investment in the health, productivity, and long-term stability of their most valuable human resource. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this system was the clear hierarchy it enforced. Rations were not distributed equally to all. They were carefully scaled according to one's skill, status, and seniority. A simple laborer hauling stone might receive a standard base ration. A highly skilled sculptor, whose chisel work could capture the eternal likeness of a pharaoh, would receive a significantly larger share. The foremen who managed the crews and the scribes who kept the all-important records sat at the top of this pay scale, receiving rations that could support not only their own families, but also allow for trade and accumulation of wealth. This created a powerful incentive structure within the community. A young man joining the workforce had a clear path for advancement. By honing his craft and demonstrating reliability, he could rise through the ranks and see his family's standard of living improve with each promotion, reflected directly in the quantity and quality of the food on his table. This system fostered a sense of professional pride and ambition. It wasn't just about building a tomb for a distant god-king. It was about earning a better life for one's own family, a tangible reward system that ensured the most talented artisans remained motivated and committed to their work for decades. This stable and predictable supply of food did more than just fill stomachs. It created the conditions for a remarkable degree of economic security and social mobility. Because the state provided the foundational elements of survival, workers and their families could plan for the future. They knew that next month, another payment of grain, fish, and vegetables would arrive. This security allowed for a vibrant internal economy to flourish within the village walls. A family that brewed an especially good batch of beer beyond their needs could trade the surplus with a neighbor for a new pottery vessel or a piece of furniture. A worker who received a large ration of fish could trade some of it for help with plastering his house or for a pair of sandals from the village cobbler. The countless Ostraker recording these small, personal transactions reveal a community that was economically dynamic and self-sufficient, all built upon the reliable platform of the state ration system. This economic cushion even provided a form of social welfare. Records indicate that on occasions when a worker was too ill or injured to work, his family would still receive a portion of his rations to ensure they did not starve. This safety net, rare in the ancient world, fostered immense loyalty and ensured that valuable skills were not lost when a craftsman faced temporary hardship. The state's investment in food was, therefore, an investment in the entire social and economic fabric of the community that served it, creating a resilient, stable, and highly productive society in the shadow of the eternal monuments they were building. While the state ration system provided a reliable foundation, it was the ingenuity and economic hustle of the workers themselves that truly enriched their daily lives, transforming a diet of sustenance into one of variety and personal choice. The people of Deir el-Medina and similar communities were far from passive ciphers in a state machine. They were savvy economic agents who actively engaged in a vibrant, informal barter economy that flourished in the spaces between their official duties. Think of the village not just as a dormitory for laborers, but as a bustling marketplace of skills and goods, where a skilled carpenter's services could be exchanged for a pot of honey, or a scribe's literacy could net him an extra bundle of fish. This internal network of trade was documented on countless ostraka, those disposable limestone notepads that recorded the minutiae of daily life. One fragment might detail an agreement where a painter offers to decorate a wooden chest for a neighbor in return for 10 loaves of bread from their upcoming ration distribution. Another might record a loan of beer to be repaid with a measure of grain after the next harvest. This system of exchange created a remarkable layer of economic resilience. It allowed families to convert surplus state-issued items, perhaps more fish than they could eat before it spoiled, or an excess of beer from a particularly successful home brewing session into other commodities that improved their quality of life. A worker could effectively use his food rations as capital, trading for sandals, furniture, or cosmetic oils, thereby elevating his family's standard of living through his own initiative and the specialized talents of his neighbors. This barter economy did more than just circulate goods. It wove a dense fabric of social interdependence and mutual support, strengthening the community from within and giving each member a tangible stake in the collective well-being beyond their state-mandated work. Alongside this bustling trade in goods and services, small-scale personal production played an equally vital role in padding out the larder and introducing delicious variety. The state provided the staples, but the workers took it upon themselves to cultivate the extras. Archaeological evidence from these villages is filled with signs of this domestic industry. The bones of ducks and geese are found in abundance within the residential areas, and we've uncovered the remains of the very pens and limestone feeding troughs used to keep them. This wasn't large-scale ranching, it was household-level husbandry. A family might keep a small flock of a half-dozen birds in a simple enclosure behind their home, letting them forage for scraps during the day. These birds were a self-replenishing source of precious protein and, just as importantly, fat. While fish provided lean protein, a roasted duck or goose offered a rich, calorie-dense meal, with its fat carefully saved for cooking and its eggs collected as a daily nutritional bonus. This practice provided a crucial buffer against any temporary interruptions in the state's fish supply and gave families direct control over a portion of their protein intake. The ability to step into their own backyard and select a bird for the evening stew represented a significant degree of dietary autonomy and security, a small but powerful form of self-sufficiency in the heart of a state-controlled system. This drive for self-reliance extended from the poultry pen to the vegetable patch. In any available sliver of earth between the mud-brick houses, workers and their families cultivated small, intensively managed garden plots. Here, they grew the ingredients that added freshness, flavor, and vital micronutrients to their predominantly grain-based diet. These kitchen gardens would have been a riot of green, featuring the pungent alliums they loved, onions, garlic, and leeks, alongside refreshing cucumbers, peppery radishes, and hearty pulses like lentils and chickpeas. These homegrown crops filled critical nutritional gaps. The cucumbers and radishes provided hydration and vitamin C, while the lentils offered a fantastic plant-based protein and iron boost that could stretch a fish stew to feed more mouths. This practice of small-scale horticulture demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of nutrition that complemented the state's caloric focus. The workers knew that these fresh vegetables kept their families healthier, warding off deficiency diseases and adding palatable variety to their meals. It also points to a deep-seated connection to the land itself. Even as they labored to build eternal tombs from stone, they nurtured life from the soil, creating a small, sustainable oasis of productivity around their homes. This combination of a vibrant barter economy and determined personal production reveals the true portrait of these ancient workers. They were not just cogs in a machine, but resourceful, adaptable people who used their skills and initiative to build a rich, varied, and resilient dietary world for themselves, ensuring that the hands that carved history were nourished by both the state's largesse and their own unwavering resourcefulness. Now, let's close our eyes for a moment and listen not to the sounds of chisels on stone or the foreman's instructions, but to the gentle, everyday rhythms of the village as the sun sets and the heat of the day begins to fade. Imagine the soft, rhythmic scraping of a grinding stone as a mother prepares flour for tomorrow's bread, a familiar sound as constant as the wind. Hear the crackle of a small fire in the hearth and the low, bubbling simmer of a clay pot filled with lentils, fish, and onions. From a nearby house drifts the lively chatter of neighbors, the laughter of children playing in the dusty street, and perhaps the soft clatter of ceramic bowls being set out on a low wooden table. The air itself is rich with the warm, earthy scent of baking emmer wheat and the pungent aroma of garlic and leek sizzling in a drop of precious oil. This was not just a time to eat, it was a sacred, daily space for connection. After the brutal physical demands of the day, the evening meal was when the community truly came together, transforming sustenance into something far greater, a ritual of family, friendship, and shared humanity. Within the intimate confines of a mud-brick home, the simple act of sharing a meal wove the fabric of daily life. The family would gather on woven mats spread across the packed earth floor, sitting in a circle around the central cooking pot. The father, his muscles aching from a day of hauling stone, might share a story of a near mishap on the scaffolding, his hands gesturing as he describes the block that almost slipped. The children would listen, wide-eyed, as they used pieces of thick, gritty bread to scoop up the hearty stew from their bowls. The mother might speak of the news from the village well, whose daughter was to be married, or whose household had received a special delivery of dates from a relative working down river. In these moments, the food was more than fuel, it was a catalyst for conversation, a reason to pause and reconnect. The sharing of a particularly good batch of beer or a prized piece of dried fruit became a small celebration, a token of affection and mutual care. This was where values were passed down, where a young boy learned the trade of his father not through formal instruction, but by listening to the shop talk of the artisans over their evening meal. It was where a daughter learned the rhythms of household management by watching her mother portion out the week's grain or skillfully season a stew with herbs from her small garden. Though not a single song or story from these workers has survived in written form, we can be certain that their meal times were filled with narrative and music. Across all cultures and all eras, food and storytelling are inseparable companions. It is almost impossible to imagine a group of men and women gathered together after a day of shared labor, not breaking into song or sharing tales. Perhaps an older carpenter, his fingers gnarled from a lifetime of work, would recount the legend of a clever fox outwitting a crocodile, a popular folktale known from other fragments of Egyptian literature. The rhythm of the story would match the rhythmic chewing of bread, the pauses filled with sips of beer. Maybe a younger worker, full of vigor, would boast in a playful rhyme about his own strength, earning good-natured laughter and challenges from his friends. The very act of repetitive food preparation, the grinding of grain, the kneading of dough, lends itself to rhythmic work songs. While grinding on her saddle quern for hours, a woman might sing a simple, haunting melody to mark the time and lessen the monotony of the task, her voice a quiet, personal soundtrack to the birth of the daily loaf. These oral traditions, forever lost to us, were the living, breathing soul of their culture, and the hearth was their primary stage. This communal aspect of food extended far beyond the nuclear family, reinforcing the entire social structure of the village. During state-sanctioned festivals, or after the successful completion of a major phase of tomb construction, the community would feast together. On these special occasions, the state distributed extra rations, perhaps even the rare luxury of beef. The shared ovens would work overtime, producing hundreds of fresh loaves. Large cauldrons of stew would simmer in open courtyards, and the whole village would gather under the stars. These were not silent, solemn affairs. They were vibrant, noisy, joyful celebrations. The sound of dozens of conversations would merge into a happy din, punctuated by the clinking of beer jars and the shared laughter that comes from full bellies and a collective sense of accomplishment. In these moments, the workers were not merely laborers, they were celebrated members of a grand, national project. The food they ate together solidified their bonds, turning colleagues into a genuine community, a band of brothers and sisters who relied on each other for survival, support, and celebration. The meal became a powerful symbol of their shared identity and their collective strength. So, when we think of their diet, we must remember that it was about so much more than calories and protein. It was a symphony of sensory experiences: the smell of baking bread, the taste of sharp onion, the sound of a shared story, the warmth of the fire, and the sight of loved ones gathered close. Their food was the centerpiece of their social universe, the glue that held families together, and the medium through which their culture was preserved and transmitted from one generation to the next. The true nourishment they received came not just from the grain and the fish, but from the laughter, the stories, and the profound sense of belonging that turned a simple meal into a feast for the heart and soul. But to fully appreciate the remarkable quality of the workers' diet, we need to place it in its proper context by comparing it to the meals served in the palaces and villas of the elite. While bread and beer were the great unifiers, consumed by the pharaoh and the laborer alike, the way these staples were prepared and the sheer breadth of additional foods available to the upper classes reveals a culinary world of staggering luxury and stark social division. For the nobility, food was not merely fuel, it was a potent symbol of status, a display of wealth, and a direct connection to the gods. Their tables groaned under the weight of delicacies that a common worker might only glimpse during a grand state festival, transforming every meal into a performance of power and privilege. The most immediate difference lay in the very quality of their bread. While the worker consumed a coarse, gritty loaf baked from roughly ground emmer wheat, the elite enjoyed bread made from flour that had been sifted multiple times to remove the abrasive husks and stone fragments. This resulted in a finer, whiter, and much softer bread, a luxury that spared their teeth from the catastrophic wear seen in the commoners, but beyond texture, the variety was astonishing. Tomb paintings and reliefs from noble burials depict a veritable bakery of shapes and flavors. There were loaves sweetened with precious honey and studded with dates or figs. There were cakes infused with aromatic spices like cinnamon and cumin, and breads enriched with milk and eggs, creating a richness unimaginable in a worker's home. The elite didn't just eat bread, they consumed it as an art form, with different shapes and recipes likely reserved for specific occasions and deities. This feast of variety extended dramatically to the world of meat. For the worker, protein was a practical matter of fish and poultry. For the elite, it was an opportunity for Epicurean exploration. Yes, they ate vast quantities of the prime beef that was so rare for others, but their hunts and husbandry extended far beyond the farmyard. The vast estates of the nobility included game reserves where professional hunters would capture oryx, addax, and gazelle. These graceful desert antelopes were considered exquisite delicacies, their lean, flavorful meat often roasted whole for banquets. They feasted on wild fowl like succulent crane and heron, brought down by throw sticks in the marshes, a scene famously depicted in Nebamun's tomb. Even the humble pig, a staple of the workers' diet, was often absent from the official offering lists and elite depictions, reflecting a cultural disdain among the upper classes for the animal they considered unclean, despite its popularity among the populace they ruled. The beverage menu for the elite also showcased their global connections. While the worker drank his thick, nourishing, and low-alcohol beer, the nobility had access to fine wines, a prestigious and expensive import. Vineyards in the Nile Delta and the western desert oases produced both red and white wines, which were carefully aged in sealed clay amphorae, often labeled with the vineyard, year, and even the name of the chief vintner, much like a modern vintage. These wines were served at lavish feasts, their consumption a clear mark of sophistication and wealth. Furthermore, the elite could afford imported luxuries like olive oil from Canaan and the Aegean, a costly alternative to the local sesame or castor oil used by commoners. Their tables were adorned with imported cedar and ebony, their food served on exquisite alabaster and faience dishes, and their meals accompanied by musicians and dancers, turning sustenance into a multi-sensory spectacle. Ultimately, this dramatic culinary divide was about more than just taste. It was a direct reflection and reinforcement of the Egyptian social pyramid. The worker's diet was engineered for maximum efficiency and physical output. It was practical, robust, and wonderfully effective at its job, powering the human machines that built an empire. The elite's diet, in contrast, was a performance of their divinity and dominion. By consuming rare game, fine wine, and honey-sweetened cakes, they were enacting their role as the intermediaries between the people and the gods, consuming the bounty of the entire world, both earthly and divine. Their feasts were a political statement, a demonstration that they lived in a realm far removed from the gritty reality of the quarry and the tomb. Yet, this comparison makes the worker's diet all the more impressive. It was not a diet of poverty, but one of purpose. While the nobility dined on gazelle and wine to showcase their power, the workers consumed their fish, bread, and beer to wield it, transforming the simple bounty of the Nile into the physical strength that carved history into stone. By modern standards, the ancient Egyptian worker's diet presents a fascinating paradox. On one hand, it was overwhelmingly dominated by carbohydrates, with bread and beer providing the vast majority of their daily caloric intake. A nutritionist today might raise an eyebrow at this seemingly skewed balance, yet when we analyze the full spectrum of what they consumed, a surprisingly sophisticated and robust nutritional picture emerges, one that was remarkably effective at supporting intense physical exertion and sustaining long-term health. The true genius of their diet wasn't in avoiding carbs, but in perfectly complementing them with targeted sources of protein, healthy fats, and a wide array of essential micronutrients. This combination created a synergistic fuel system that efficiently powered the most demanding manual labor. The high carbohydrate load from emmer wheat bread and barley beer was not a dietary flaw, it was a deliberate and brilliant energy strategy. For a laborer engaged in continuous, heavy work like hauling stone blocks or carving rock for 8 to 10 hours a day, their body was a furnace requiring a constant supply of fuel. Complex carbohydrates are the body's preferred source of energy, broken down into glucose that muscles burn for fuel. The coarse, whole grain nature of their bread meant this energy was released slowly and steadily, providing a long-lasting base of power that prevented the energy crashes associated with simple sugars. Furthermore, this immense intake of whole grains and the substantial fiber content from the beers, suspended yeast, and grain husks created a powerful prebiotic environment in their gut. A healthy gut microbiome is now understood to be crucial not just for digestion, but for overall immune function and even mental well-being. Their digestive systems were likely populated by robust cultures of beneficial bacteria, all fed by the steady supply of fibrous, fermented foods, which would have helped protect them from common pathogens and aided in the absorption of nutrients from their other foods. Where this diet truly excelled was in its clever integration of high-quality protein. The regular, abundant supply of fish from the Nile was a masterstroke of practical nutrition. Fish like Nile perch and catfish provided complete protein, meaning they contained all the essential amino acids necessary for muscle repair and growth. After a day of physically breaking down muscle tissue, this protein was the essential building block for recovery, allowing them to return to work the next day strong and capable. The poultry they raised added another layer, offering not just protein but also valuable fats. These fats were crucial for absorbing fat-soluble vitamins, providing a denser form of stored energy and supporting hormonal health. The plant-based proteins from lentils, chickpeas, and fava beans further supplemented this intake, while also delivering a powerful boost of iron. This combination of animal and plant proteins created a sustained-release amino acid profile that continuously fed their muscles, preventing the breakdown and weakness that would have otherwise crippled their workforce. It was this protein-rich foundation, layered on top of their carbohydrate engine, that enabled their bodies to not just work, but to rebuild and grow stronger through the relentless demands of their labor. The micronutrient profile of their diet is where its hidden sophistication becomes most apparent. While they had no scientific understanding of vitamins, their daily consumption patterns unknowingly provided a near-perfect cocktail of these essential compounds. Their thick, cloudy beer was a literal vitamin B complex supplement in a jug. The fermentation process generated high levels of B vitamins, particularly thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, and folate. These vitamins are fundamental cofactors in the body's energy production pathway. They are essential for converting the carbohydrates from their bread and beer into usable cellular energy. Without this steady supply of B vitamins from their beer, all those calories from grain would have been far less effective, potentially leading to fatigue, weakness, and neurological issues. Simultaneously, the holy trinity of onions, garlic, and leeks, along with other garden vegetables like radishes and cucumbers, provided them with a reliable source of vitamin C. In a land without citrus fruits, this was their primary defense against scurvy. The vitamin C not only prevented the bleeding gums and joint pain of deficiency, but was also vital for the production of collagen. the protein that holds our bodies together. From skin and tendons to the very bones, they were constantly stressing. When we synthesize all these components, the health outcomes observed in their skeletal remains make perfect sense. These workers were, by and large, remarkably healthy and robust. Their bones show strong development and little evidence of the metabolic diseases like rickets or osteoporosis that stem from severe nutritional deficiencies. The physical anthropology tells a story of people who were well adapted to their environment and well fueled for their tasks. The common health issues they faced were not from a lack of food, but from the specific qualities of it, the extreme dental wear from gritty bread being the most direct example. Yet, even this had a paradoxical upside. The low-sugar, coarse nature of their diet, combined with the antimicrobial properties of their beloved onions and garlic, meant they suffered very few cavities. Their diet was a system designed for resilience and output. It provided sustained energy from carbohydrates, the building blocks for repair from diverse proteins, and the essential catalytic vitamins and minerals to make the entire process efficient. It was a diet perfectly calibrated for the reality of their lives, proving that nutritional wisdom can be found not in modern fads, but in the time-tested, practical eating patterns that fueled one of history's most enduring and physically accomplished civilizations. So, after this deep dive into the evidence, we must return to our starting point and directly confront the popular myths that have persisted for so long. The modern imagination, fed by dramatic films and outdated historical ideas, often presents the pyramid builders as a half-starved mass of slaves, surviving on a few crusts of bread and sips of muddy water, their lives defined by deprivation. This image is not just inaccurate, it is a complete disservice to the sophisticated, practical civilization they built. The ancient reality, as revealed by archaeology, osteology, and their own administrative records, tells a story that is radically different and far more compelling. Their diet was not meager, it was monumental in its own right. It was not monotonous, it was a symphony of flavors and textures drawn from the river, the desert, and their own gardens. And it was certainly not bland, it was seasoned by necessity, ingenuity, and a profound understanding of what the human body needs to achieve the impossible. Let's dismantle the myth of the meager ration once and for all. The idea that these workers were teetering on the brink of starvation is completely shattered by the sheer volume of food they were officially provided. The state ration system was not a minimalist subsistence plan, it was a massive, caloric investment. A standard laborer's daily pay of 10 loaves of bread and 2 jugs of beer alone represents a staggering caloric intake. When you consider that their bread was a dense, whole grain loaf packed with complex carbohydrates, and that their beer was a thick, porridge-like meal in a jar, we are looking at a daily fuel supply that could easily exceed several thousand calories per person, a necessity for men engaged in work that would challenge modern athletes. This was just the foundation. On top of this, they received regular distributions of fish, providing high-quality protein, and bundles of vegetables that delivered essential vitamins. This wasn't a diet of scarcity, it was a diet of abundance, carefully calibrated to match their astronomical energy expenditure. The state knew that a hungry worker is a weak worker, and a weak worker cannot lift 2-ton blocks of limestone. The economic logic is inescapable. It would have been catastrophically inefficient to invest decades in a pyramid's construction only to have the workforce fail due to malnutrition. The food was as crucial to the project as the stone itself. The second myth to fall is that of a monotonous and bland culinary existence. How could a diet built on bread and beer be anything but boring? The evidence screams otherwise. Think about the variety embedded in their daily lives. Their protein didn't come from a single source. It rotated between the flaky, white flesh of Nile perch, the rich, fatty, dark meat of a domestic duck, the salty tang of dried fish jerky, and the occasional celebratory luxury of pork or even beef. Their palate was awakened daily by the sharp, pungent crunch of a raw onion, the aromatic punch of garlic in a slow-simmered lentil stew, and the fresh, green essence of leeks. Their meals were punctuated by the sudden, sweet burst of a date, the chewy, honeyed texture of a dried fig, or the tangy pop of a raisin. This was not a monochrome menu. This was a diet with a full spectrum of flavors: savory, salty, sour, bitter, and sweet, all playing off each other. The rhythm of their year was marked by seasons of food, the fresh fish of the Nile's bounty, the poultry raised in their own yards, the seasonal harvest of grapes and figs, and the year-round reliability of their stored grains, pulses, and dried fruits. Their cuisine was dynamic, responsive to the environment, and deeply connected to the cycles of the world around them. Ultimately, the most profound truth is that their diet was not merely about physical sustenance, it was a culturally rich and socially vital force. Food was the currency of their labor, the centerpiece of their family life, and the catalyst for their community. The act of sharing the evening stew was a ritual that reinforced family bonds. The bustling barter economy, where a jar of beer could be traded for a pair of sandals, wove a web of mutual dependence and social cohesion. The great state-sponsored feasts, where the entire village shared in the rare bounty of roasted beef, were powerful declarations of their collective value and shared purpose. This food culture fostered a sense of identity and pride. They were not anonymous drones, they were highly skilled state employees who were paid a fair, tangible wage for their irreplaceable work. Their willingness to go on strike when those rations were delayed is the ultimate proof of this. They knew their worth, and their diet was the undeniable evidence of it. The ancient Egyptian workers' table was a place of strength, of community, and of resilience. It was there, in the simple, robust act of breaking bread and sharing a stew, that they found the strength not just to survive, but to build for eternity. The myth of the underfed slave crumbles before the reality of the well-fed, respected artisan, whose daily bread was the very fuel of civilization. So, let's take a moment for a true culinary thought experiment. Could you, sitting here in the modern world, actually stomach a full day of eating like an ancient Egyptian worker? This isn't about the nutritional science or the historical facts anymore. It's a challenge to your senses, a journey into a world of taste and texture that would feel profoundly alien to our contemporary palates. Let's walk through a single day, meal by meal, and truly imagine the experience. Your day would begin not with the aroma of coffee, but with the thick, yeasty scent of yesterday's beer and the dry, earthy smell of a leftover loaf of bread. For breakfast, there is no quick bowl of cereal or sweet pastry. You break your fast with a dense, heavy bread that feels more like a brick than a bagel. As you bite into it, your teeth don't sink in, they grind. The first sensation is an audible, gritty crunch. It's not the pleasant crunch of a toast crust, but the unsettling grind of fine sand and stone fragments against your enamel. You chew slowly, the abrasive texture demanding effort, each mouthful a reminder of the coarse grindstone that produced the flour. To wash it down, you take a long drink from a jug of beer. But this is nothing like the crisp, carbonated lager you might be picturing. It's a room temperature, thick and soupy liquid, the consistency of a thin oatmeal. The flavor is sour and tangy, with a funky, yeasty undertone, and it's filled with a cloudy sediment that makes you want to stir it before each sip. There is no refreshing fizz, just a heavy, porridge-like swallow that sits in your stomach like a meal itself. This combination is pure, utilitarian fuel, completely devoid of the comforting sweetness or comforting warmth we associate with a morning meal. As the sun climbs to its zenith and you take your midday break, you unpack your lunch. The environment offers no respite. you're likely sitting in a sliver of shade against a sun-baked limestone cliff, the dust of your labor still coating your hands. You unwrap a piece of dried, salted fish. Its aroma is potent and briny, the smell of the Nile concentrated by sun and salt into something fiercely pungent. The fish itself is tough and leathery, requiring you to tear at it with your teeth. It's overwhelmingly salty, a deliberate preservation method that makes your throat dry and your lips pucker. To cut through the salt, you bite directly into a raw onion. There's no gentle sautéing to sweeten its flavor. You experience its full, sharp, sulfuric power. Your eyes might water from the pungent vapors as the crisp, spicy crunch of the onion clashes with the chewy saltiness of the fish. All of this is washed down with more of that substantial beer, which now serves less as a beverage and more as a necessary tool to cleanse the palate and rehydrate your salt-depleted body. This is not a leisurely lunch, it's a refueling stop, a stark and functional consumption of energy sources where flavor is secondary to sheer necessity. The evening meal, while more communal, would still test modern sensibilities. The stew that has been simmering for hours in a clay pot is a murky, thick concoction. It's not a delicate broth, but a hearty, fibrous slurry of lentils, fava beans, and whatever protein was available. The dominant flavor profile is earthy and savory, deeply infused with the powerful essence of boiled garlic and leeks. The garlic, having cooked for hours, has lost its raw bite, but has disseminated its potent, sulfurous character throughout every spoonful. The texture is uniformly soft and mushy, with no contrasting crispness except for the gritty bits from the bread you use as your utensil. You scoop the stew with a chunk of bread, and the gritty texture from the morning now mixes with the soft, earthy mush of the legumes, creating a consistency that is at once rough and paste-like. As you eat, seated on the floor in the dim, smoky light of an oil lamp, the sensory experience is total. The gritty bread, the salty fish, the funky beer, the pungent alliums, all merging into a single, powerful testament to a life of physical exertion. There are no subtle herbs, no complex spice blends, no sugary desserts to provide relief. This diet was a masterpiece of practical nutrition, but for a palate accustomed to the refined, varied, and often sweetened flavors of the modern world, it would be a relentless, day-long assault of strong, earthy, and fundamentally challenging tastes. To eat like them was to participate directly in the gritty, powerful, and unvarnished reality of the world that built the pyramids. When we stand before the great pyramids of Giza or gaze upon the painted tombs in the Valley of the Kings, we naturally marvel at the architectural genius and the spiritual ambition they represent. Yet these stone wonders are only half the story. The other half, the human half, is written in the very grain and fish that powered the hands that built them. The true foundation of these eternal structures was not just the limestone bedrock of the Giza Plateau, it was the profound, state-organized system of nutrition that transformed agricultural surplus into physical might. This was not a peripheral support system, it was the central economic and biological engine of the entire civilization. Imagine the logistical challenge, sustaining a workforce of thousands, not for weeks or months, but for decades, in a remote desert environment, all while demanding from them a level of physical exertion that would be staggering even by modern standards. The solution was a masterpiece of practical planning. The state, acting as the ultimate employer, created a circular economy of energy. The fertile silt of the Nile was converted into vast fields of emmer wheat and barley. This grain was then harvested and processed on an industrial scale in state-run bakeries and breweries, transformed into millions of loaves of bread and vats of beer. This calorie-dense fuel was then distributed as the primary wage to the workforce, who in turn consumed it and converted it back into the physical labor of quarrying, hauling, and carving. The pyramids, in this very real sense, are a monumental conversion of grain into stone. They are the physical manifestation of countless loaves of bread and jugs of beer, a testament to the power of a well-fed population. Without this meticulously managed food supply, the grand visions of the pharaohs would have remained just that, visions. The stones would never have left the quarry, the tombs would never have been dug, and the names of the kings would have been lost to the desert winds. The diet was the indispensable catalyst that turned ambition into reality. This system's brilliance lay in its brilliant understanding of human motivation and stability. By providing a reliable, substantial, and varied diet, the state did more than just prevent starvation. It fostered a sense of value, loyalty, and shared purpose among the workforce. These skilled artisans and laborers were not disposable drones. They were recognized as the invaluable asset they truly were. Their pay in high-quality food was a tangible, daily acknowledgement of their essential role in the cosmic order. This created a powerful social contract. The workers received security, the assurance that their families would be fed, housed, and cared for, even in times of injury or illness, as evidenced by the welfare provisions we see at Deir el-Medina. In return, the state received not just their labor, but their commitment. A well-fed worker is a productive worker, but a valued worker is an invested one. This investment fostered the incredible craftsmanship we see in the precise alignments of the pyramids and the exquisite detail in the tomb paintings. These were not the rushed efforts of a brutalized underclass. They are works of profound care and precision, created by people who took pride in their craft and understood their part in a grand, national project. The occasional feasts where the rare luxury of beef was distributed were not just calorie boosts, they were powerful psychological tools. They were celebrations of collective achievement, moments where the state and the workforce came together, sharing in the bounty and reinforcing the bonds that made such achievements possible. This created a stable, resilient society, largely free from the famines and social unrest that could topple other ancient states. The reliable food supply was the glue that held the entire enterprise together, turning a collection of individuals into a cohesive, purpose-driven community capable of undertakings that spanned generations. The legacy of this ancient nutritional wisdom extends far beyond the desert sands of Egypt, offering a powerful lesson that resonates through the ages. The success of this civilization stands as a timeless testament to a simple, profound truth. A society's greatest achievements are built upon the health and well-being of its people. The ancient Egyptians, without our understanding of macronutrients or vitamins, intuitively grasped that human potential is unlocked not by coercion, but by provision. They built for eternity because they first ensured that the builders themselves had the strength to see the task through. This principle echoes across history. The grand cathedrals of medieval Europe, the vast road networks of the Roman Empire, the intellectual flourishing of the Islamic Golden Age, all were underpinned by agricultural surpluses and trade networks that could feed concentrated populations of specialists, freeing them from the daily grind of subsistence farming to focus on art, engineering, and science. When we look at the challenges of our own modern world, the lesson of the pyramid builders feels strikingly relevant. Our monuments may be different space stations, medical breakthroughs, technological innovations, but the fundamental requirement remains the same. These modern pyramids are built by well-educated, healthy, and secure populations. The diet of the ancient Egyptian worker reminds us that investment in human capital, in the literal and metaphorical nourishment of a people, is not a social welfare expense. It is the most fundamental investment a civilization can make in its own future. It is the ultimate source of strength, creativity, and resilience. The stones of the pyramids have endured for millennia, but the true, enduring legacy is this profound understanding. To build something that lasts, you must first build up the people who will build it. Their daily bread was far more than just food. It was the physical substance of their civilization's ambition, the very fuel of immortality. So as we reach the end of our journey, let's gather the pieces of this remarkable story. The true diet of the ancient Egyptian worker was not a story of deprivation, but one of astounding robustness and surprising variety. It was a masterfully engineered system of nutrition built on 4 powerful pillars that worked in perfect harmony. The foundational duo of gritty, whole-grain bread and thick, porridge-like beer provided the immense caloric ballast and essential B vitamins needed for relentless physical exertion. This powerhouse of carbohydrates was then expertly supplemented by the steady, abundant protein flowing from the Nile in the form of fish and from the village yards in the form of ducks, geese, and pigs, delivering the crucial building blocks for muscle repair and strength. And weaving it all together was the vibrant world of vegetables and legumes, the pungent holy trinity of onions, garlic, and leeks, along with lentils, cucumbers, and radishes, which supplied the vital vitamins, fiber, and flavor that prevented deficiency and turned simple sustenance into a satisfying meal. This was not a haphazard menu. It was a sophisticated, state-sponsored fuel system designed with one magnificent goal in mind: to power the human engines that would build some of the most ambitious and enduring structures the world has ever known. The pyramids and tombs are not just monuments to pharaohs, they are testaments to the strength derived from this incredibly effective diet. This revelation completely transforms our understanding of this ancient civilization. It shows us a society that possessed a deep, practical wisdom about human health and motivation. The state understood that a well-fed workforce was a strong, productive, and, crucially, a loyal workforce. By investing so heavily in the nutrition of its people, Egypt was investing in its own stability and immortality. The workers, in turn, were not powerless cogs in a machine. They were respected artisans who understood their own value, as proven by their willingness to go on strike when their rations were delayed. Their diet gave them the physical and social resilience to not only perform staggering feats of labor, but to build rich, communal lives in the shadow of the monuments they were creating. The legacy of this system is a powerful, timeless lesson. The greatest achievements in human history are always built upon a foundation of well-being. A civilization's true strength is measured not just by the height of its pyramids, but by the quality of the bread it breaks with the hands that build them. Now, we'd love to hear from you. After exploring this world of gritty bread, substantial beer, and Nile fish, what part of this story surprised you the most? Was it the sheer scale of the ration system, the reality of their surprisingly varied menu, or perhaps the striking evidence from their own skeletons? Share your biggest surprise or your own thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep this fascinating conversation going.